things are possible when we believe. Old chains are breakable when we receive Yahweh. You keep your promises. If you said it, we believe it. If you said it, if you said it, we believe it. Said it, we believe it. You're a man.
You're a man of your word. You said it, we believe it.
Yeah. If you
said it, we believe it.
You're a man.
You're a man of your word.
All things are possible when we believe. Old chains are breakable when we receive Yahweh. You keep your promises. If you said it, believe it. If you said it, if you said it, we believe it. Oh, if you said it,
we believe it.
You're a man of your word.
You're a man of your word. You said it, we believe it.
Oh, if you said
it, we believe it.
You're a man of your
You're a
word.
man of your
We
word.
have this confidence.
We have this confidence.
You'll finish what you
You'll
started.
finish what you started.
God, you have never
You have
failed.
never failed. You won't start with me.
You're present in every step, patient in every heartache. God, you have never failed. You won't start with me. Yeah. Everybody right. Yeah. If you said
it, we believe it.
If you said it, yeah.
You said it, we believe it.
'Cause you're a man of your word.
You're a man of your
If you
word.
said
You said it, we believe it.
yeah. Oh, if you said it, we believe it. You're a man.
You're a man of your word.
Oh, if you said it, we believe it. If you said it, yeah. If you said it, we believe it. If you said it, can you help me say?
You said
We
it,
believe it.
believe it.
If you said it,
you said it,
oh,
You said it.
we believe it.
believe
If you
it.
said it,
You said it,
if you said it,
you said
we
it.
believe it.
Believe it.
If you said it,
You said it.
your promises are
said it.
yes and amen.
Believe
Yes
it.
and amen.
You
Lord,
said it.
I am who you say I am.
You said it.
I am who you
Believe
say
it.
I am.
You said it.
I am who you say I am. I am who you say I am.
I am who you say I am.
I am who you
I
say.
am who you say
He
I
said
am.
we're a royal priesthood,
I
a
am
chosen
who you say I am.
generation.
I am who you say I
Take
am.
it up, I am.
I am
We can trust in you, put our faith in you. If you said it, we believe it. 'Cause you're a man of your word.
What's going on, Kensington? Whether you are here at one of our campuses or you are watching from home, we are so glad that you are here with us today. I'm Taylor Leal, and I am the K-Kids Early Childhood Director at our Troy campus. And on behalf of all of us at Kensington, welcome. Now, I know we're tired of the pandemic and we're tired of talking about the pandemic, but really, this past year has been especially hard on our kids, hasn't it? They've been shifting to online learning or partial days or a hybrid. Even if their education is back to some sort of normal, maybe they can't see their grandparents or their favorite friends or play sports like they used to. But in the midst of all that, I do have some really awesome news for you. Most of our campuses have been able to reopen K-Kids during specific service times. K-Kids is our children's program for children birth through grade 5. It's a place to be nurtured, to learn about Jesus, and to experience His love through connecting with others. And also, it's a ton of fun. What I love most about K-Kids is seeing the excitement on our kids' faces as they run down the hallway and watching their faces beam with joy while their teachers reenact Bible stories through a drama or a silly song. It's no secret that our kids love seeing their friends and their leaders, all while hearing about the incredible message of Jesus Christ. While we are trying to open up our kids program during every single service time, we are seeing a huge need for K-Kids leaders. We know now more than ever that our kids need mentors, they need leaders, and they need people who want to give their kids a fun and memorable time. And in order to welcome every single child, we need you. I want to invite you to be part of K-Kids. We are looking for volunteers in the nursery. We are looking for small group leaders for preschool and for elementary, and so much more. It is so worthwhile to pour into the next generation, and I would love to invite you to join our team. You can go to the hub after service today, or you can visit our website at www.kensingtonchurch.org/serve. Now, once you're on that page, just simply click our campus. Let's visit Traverse City today. So you'll check the box next to your area of interest. Elementary sounds good. Click the box that says more info, hit the connect button, and simply fill out the volunteer interest form. Once you do that, someone from our awesome kids team will be in contact with you. Thank you for helping us out in my favorite area of Kensington. Well, we are in the second week of our new series called Personified. This series will lead us right up to the Good Friday and Easter services. I'm so excited to hear more about Jesus' final week on earth. His choice to live and die as a human being was the ultimate act of love. And today has something to do with a donkey and palm branches. Wait, isn't that supposed to be later in March? Well, I guess we'll have to listen up and see what today is all about. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, hey, good morning, everyone. How you doing out there? Fantastic. Well, hey, I want to introduce myself to you. My name is Drew Daniels, and I work with our young adult ministry that's called 1829. Now, that might surprise some of you. You're like, man, I've never heard 1829. Well, it's awesome. It's an awesome ministry. There's so many young people who I recognize at this location in Clinton Township. But we gather on Tuesday nights at our Troy location, and we have small groups that are offered here. So honestly, I come in here and there. I kind of am between all these campuses, but I'm so honored and glad, grateful I get to be here with all of you. Now, if you're a guest here with us this morning, I believe something that's true about all of us, whether you're first time or a long time, is that we all desire to be known and needed. We want to be known in community and relationship and intimacy, and we want to be needed. We want to know that our gifts have purpose and value. And so the way and the opportunity for you to be known and needed is through our hub, which is a place in our lobby where you can go, again, to get connected, to feel both known and needed. And we do have some areas specifically here at Clinton Township where there's some opportunity and need. Number one is marriage mentors. If you are interested in helping young couples who are engaged in the pre-marriage process, this. I mean, we need your help. Maybe you're married for 20 years and it feels like, I know it's 2 decades, but it feels like 2 centuries, you know. For me right now, like I'm actually helping some young people out in marriage, and it's pretty crazy. And if I'm honest, I don't even know what I'm doing. So, you know, that hopefully for you, that gives you that confidence to know that all you have to do is just be with somebody in their journey. And ultimately your empathy and your knowledge will be able to really help prepare them and set a foundation for a marriage and a relationship for the rest of their life. Additionally, another way to set the foundation is through our student ministries. I actually believe one of the best ways for a student and a young person to keep growing in their faith is if we capture them by middle school. I mean, this is statistically true of the upcoming generation. And I'm not biased, but I do believe y'all have one of the best student teams that I know, and Steven and Tyler and Colin and Mason and all the whole crew. And so if you are interested, or you know a teenager or preteen that needs to get involved, they meet Sunday nights, I believe. Again, don't quote me on that, but go out to the hub and talk to them. They're a wonderful team, and they'd be honored to meet your student. But hey, right now, something in our country that's happening is there's a particular state in the South that's beginning to feel the pain of Michigan. And but honestly, it's pretty devastating down there. Right now, over 500,000 people, their power was interrupted. 200,000 people still don't have power. In fact, over 12 million Texans, a lot of their water services were disrupted. And so if you're interested in contributing directly to everything that's happened in Texas, we have a partnership called Draw. It's a Draw team, and there's a few easy ways to give. You can text. And honestly, I actually picked up a couple from the airport who was in Texas visiting family just on vacation. They just so happened to be there, and they have 2 young babies under 2 years old. And they said that there was no place to eat. They couldn't get food anywhere, and so they had to go to the gas station to eat beef jerky and Pringles. So if you're interested in helping out and making a huge impact, and for what it's worth, and feel free to text 7797, follow the prompts, or give on the Kensington app. It's one of the easiest ways to do this, and I'm sure that they'd be grateful. Well, hey, this week, as Taylor had mentioned earlier, we're in the series called Personified, which simply is examining the emotions of Jesus and his humanity. I mean, many of us, we hear about this divine aspect, this God aspect of who Jesus is, but the truth is that he was profoundly human. In fact, it says that he emptied himself. He actually gave up his divine privileges and acted and operated as a man, fully experiencing the vibrant emotions that you and I experience. And so I have a question for you. Have you ever felt immensely responsible for how somebody else feels? And you wonder if you've reached out enough, if you've loved them enough, if you've encouraged them enough, if you've been faithful or a good friend, or if you are a good enough parent, or maybe you weren't bold enough in your challenge of them because you want to be that person, but you also don't feel like you know them that well. But ultimately you feel that weight and that pressure of being responsible for the relationship and for how they feel, right? And especially if you're a Jesus follower in the room, right? Because at this point now you represent God and you follow Christ. And so if you don't love them well enough, all of a sudden God's not being represented, and maybe this is going to affect their faith view or even your witness or opportunity to share your faith with them. And that's all what's at stake, someone's view of God, right? And so today, I believe that there's an event that happened a week before Jesus' death where people seemingly believed that he was meeting their expectations, but deep down he knew that he was disappointing the following that he had gathered for 3 years. As people shouted, Hosanna, which means save us or rescue us, Jesus knew that he was disappointing them. So in this tradition of this series, we're reading the scriptures as we head into Easter, and I invited my friend Emily to share.
As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage on the Mountain of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and at once you will find a donkey tied there with her colt by her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, say that the Lord needs them, and he will send them right away." The disciples went, and as they did in what Jesus instructed them, they brought the donkey and the colt and placed their coats on them for Jesus to sit on. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others put branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest heavens!" When Jesus entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred and asked, "Who is this?" The crowds answered, "This is Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth in Galilee.
Hosanna in the highest. Let our King be lifted up. Jesus, you be lifted higher, higher, be lifted higher. Jesus, you be lifted higher, higher, be lifted higher. Jesus, you be lifted higher, higher, be lifted higher. Jesus, you be lifted higher, higher, 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 higher. Let our King be lifted up. Let our King be lifted up. Let our King be lifted up.
That was the cry of the people in the streets. That is the person that they needed him to be. Save us, rescue us. They hoped that what Jesus said about himself was true. And today, I want to focus on this idea of what it feels like and what it means to be a disappointment or to be disappointed. Now, 3 weeks ago, my wife and I, we were sitting in our home talking in the living room, and we heard a massive boom outside of our home. And so we raced to look out the window, and my car had exploded in the driveway. And it was catching on fire, and the flames were growing taller. And so this is a perfect moment to receive the offering I'm kidding. But the flames were growing taller, and honestly, the garage, it looked like it was beginning to melt and catch on fire itself. And we sat there, and I absolutely was freaked out. And my first instinct, my first thought was, if that fire on the front end of the car gets to the back end and hits the gas tank, that thing is going to explode. And down goes the garage, down goes our house. And immediately, usually I'm like the freeze guy in the moment of like terror. Like I froze up for whatever reason. Like I channeled my inner Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in this moment. Like I took action. I looked at my wife. I said, call 911, get on the phone, get your coat. And so we got our coat, we got our shoes, we got our baby, we got his blanket, we wrapped him up, we got the dog, we left the cat. And we get out into the street, and of course, all of the neighbors are outside, and many of them we never met. This is the first time we meet them, and they're just feeling so terrible for us. They're like, "Oh my gosh, what's your name?" I'm like, "It's Drew." They're like, "I mean, gosh, you guys are cold. Did you get coats? I mean, do you want gloves?" I was like, "No, I started a fire to make sure I was all warm." And like we're out there, and sure enough, the fire department comes and they catch it in time, and they extinguish the car. And so I'm sitting here trying to explain to the fire department what happened. And I mean, if you don't believe me, this is a picture of my car. Oh, baby. Yeah, that's right. That's the frame that's left of it. And honestly, like in this moment, you're probably begging, I mean, what happened, Drew? I mean, the cars just don't explode. I mean, you're right. And I did all this to be a little dramatic, but it got your attention. But what happened is that this car, its battery, my dad and I changed the battery in it, but for whatever reason, there's like a loose connection somewhere in the car. So this battery was dying and getting drained. And so I pull my car up next to it, and I get out the jumper cables, some of you know, and you get the jumper cables out. And, I've jumped so many cars. And I'm sitting there talking to the police, and I'm just like, they're like, how, what happened? Did you cross the wires? I was like, no, I mean, I'm so careful. Like, I looked at the thing, red to red, black to black. Like, I know I didn't get that wrong. And they're like, yeah, I mean, how long did you leave it on? I was like, I don't know. Like, I walked inside for like 10 minutes, and they're like, yeah, I don't know. And then they saw the wires, and it looks like they overheated, and it blew up the battery. And so, that's ended up what happened. Now, what was so interesting was once all the police, the fire department was gone, I sat there with my wife, and it's that moment where you're trying to recall the trauma. You're trying to recall because I had no idea how this happened. And so I'm sitting here, and we're counting it like, was it the wires? They said it was cheap, and it burned this place in the other car. Like, what happened? And my wife begins to kind of lead me down this pathway of like, you came inside, and then, you talked to Bronson, our baby, a little bit. I was like, yeah, I talked to him, and then you made those jokes, remember? I was like, yeah, I made those jokes at him. And then she goes, yeah, and then you went down on the couch. I was like, I went on the couch. She's like, you began to scroll for, it had him in a few minutes. I was like, yeah, I scrolled for a few minutes. She's like, then you reposted that thing on Instagram. And I was like, yeah, I did repost that thing on Instagram. And she was like, you were in here for a long time. I was like, I left that on for way too long, didn't I? And it overheated. And she just goes, yeah, I think that's what happened. I was like, do we need to tell anyone? She's like, no, we don't need to tell anybody this. And so I was like, all right. So I went and got my coat and my hat and my gloves. She's like, where are you going? I was like, I'm going to go lay down on Hall Road really quick. And but what was so hard about it was a few days later, we thought my other car was miraculously okay, and it was moving and driving and all these things. And then we got news that it was totaled. So all of a sudden, in one afternoon, we had 2 cars, and now we have 0 cars with a 10-month-old baby, and I had a couple speaking engagements that I had to get to in time. And I'm sitting there, and that news was devastating because the other car was completely paid off. This other car was virtually paid off. And now I put my family, because of my carelessness, because I had done it 1,000 times before, because of my actions. And I'm feeling the weight of the financial disappointment, of the relational disappointment, creating trauma in my wife of like, what would happen had I been standing there? I still can't make eye contact with the cat. But I learned 2 things. And maybe they're obvious to you, but the first one, as I learned, is that disappointment makes us dishonest. Disappointment makes us dishonest. I mean, when I told this story to my friends, the police officers, it was 10 minutes. I'm talking about, family on the phone, it was 5. I was like, man, I went inside, it was 5 minutes. And then I'm talking to my friends, and it's like, I closed the door behind me, and it just blew up. See, what we all do is we present the best version of the story. In fact, my wife, she says that, whenever there's a conflict or a drama between two people or a couple or something, or a fight, one person comes to you, tells their side of the story, and then the other person comes and they tell you their side of the story, and you don't know who to believe and who's right. And my wife just says, who knows? They're both telling the best version of the story, right? Because in those moments, you're not telling, all the ways that you reacted, you're telling all the ways that you pursued it, and how, your thinking is clearly logical, and it's that really other person. I mean, you should have seen how they responded. But we're not going to actually tell those details, because we don't want to have to be honest with ourselves. I mean, this disappointment, maybe it was our fault, right? And then additionally, I had a mentor who had this rule. He called it the times 10 rule. As in, whenever you're in conversation with somebody and they, admit something small, usually you times it by 10. So someone's just like, yeah, like that season of life, that was hard for me. I didn't know what to do. You'd go, oh, hold on. You just admitted something, and I have to multiply that by 10 for how it really was. So whenever someone says, yeah, I'm tempted in that way sometimes, it's like, no, you struggle in that way, right? Or yeah, I guess I really do struggle. It's more like, no, that's something that deeply is impairing your life, and it's allowing you it's eating away at your soul. It's not just a struggle, it's the headline in your universe. It's a disappointment. It makes us dishonest. And I think the reason why is because we are terrified to be misunderstood. We're terrified that people won't really see our intentions or won't see our efforts or won't know the full context to know that in that season of life, in that conversation, in that relationship, that we did the best that we could. And the second thing that I learned, and I know this is obvious, but it's that disappointment creates disconnection. Not just with somebody else because we're being dishonest, right? But that dishonesty, it breaks that relationship because there's no opportunity for connection. But not only does it make us disconnect with them, it disconnects us from ourselves and who we really are, what we really stand for. When we lose ourselves, we lose even some of our identity the moment that disappointment happens. And what we want to do is protect everything about ourselves. For me, in the last few weeks, months, I don't know what's happening, but I am entering into more hard conversations than I've ever entered into in all areas of my life. For me, I'm terrified of conflict. I'll just be so straight up with you. I hate it. I don't like calling people out. I don't like that's not my thing at all. And so, the only place I feel good about that is with my wife and my twin brother. That's it. But for whatever reason, in my work world, I'm getting all of these conversations, and it's eating, and it's actually hitting me right in my own identity. And for me, what I've seen is that my anger has actually become ugly, and I've never seen myself react, bite down, become defensive and protective in this way to people who aren't my family. And I'm looking at this feeling so disappointed, and operating that self-protectionism, and I realize it's because some of these things are concerning my identity. Is that I work in a field and a job where I care for people, and so when people don't feel loved or they don't feel appreciated or empathized with, and I'm being challenged that's not me, all of a sudden that tackles the very thing that I pride myself on. I pride myself on wanting to love people. I will sit with people. People are my heart. I will sit with people for days. I will dive into the story. I will ask questions. I want to do deep listening. And so whenever people feel like I disappointed them, for me it attacks the very thing that I pride and tell myself about who I am. And I learned the reason why I do that is because, for me, when I was a child, my parents were always like, man, you guys are just good kids. They felt like they didn't have to worry about us. And that was a confirmation. I was like, oh, I'm a good kid. And then I go to school and I was a good kid. And so what did I learn? If I'm a good kid, I will be worthy of continuing to receive the love. And so for me, what this did is made me want to be this perfect, ideal person. So why? Because I wanted to be worthy of people's love. And so if I'm imperfect, then I have to rake myself over the coals. And so for me, what I've begun to understand is the moment that I feel challenged, all of a sudden, I just ache and hunger for grace. I ache for someone to just forgive me for the mistake that I did make. Because for me, I just go to myself, I'm like, man, all of the good that I try to do, man, shouldn't that outweigh all of the small mistakes. Like even in marriage, this was so hard between me and my wife, where like I would just try to serve, and what I'd do is we get in these fights, and I'd recall all of these ways that I was a good husband, and I tried, and I just couldn't get over the fact that I wasn't getting forgiveness for the one or the two issues or the ways that I was disappointing her. And what I learned is that I have to be okay with relinquishing the right to be seen and understood, and that it's actually okay for me to be imperfect. And I believe that we can all do this because Jesus relinquished the right to be right. He relinquished the right to be seen and understood by the people who knew him best and followed him and had the highest expectations for him. And so in a moment, we're actually going to go into the story of this event that happened a week before his death, where it seemingly looked like he was pleasing people and meeting this expectation, but deep down he knew that the statement that he was making would confuse all of them and mislead all of them and disappoint most of them. But before we do that, I actually want to pause for a moment and receive our offering. Now, we don't kind of pass anything here, and if you're a guest with us, and maybe you're on the fringe of Kensington in this whole place, we want to say this. Thank you so much for your continued generosity in this time. We really believe that it's through generosity, even Kensington being generous with other places, that helps see the kingdom advance and move forward. So we just want to say thank you so much for being a part of that. And again, if you've maybe never given before, one of the easiest ways to give is actually to text. You can text the word Kensington to 77977. It'll pop out a link to you. You can click the link. Additionally, giving on the app or even writing a church to Kensington Church and dropping it in some of the buckets that we have on the way out. Again, this is just a supreme gratitude that we have for your continued generosity. And so I want to come back because this event that Jesus is about to enter into, I have a question that I want to ask you that I think you might find entertaining. What comes to your mind when I say, name a country that desired to have a political leader who exhibited godly values, and a country that wanted a political leader that had godly values so that it could restore peace unto the nation and that other nations would respect it? Ancient Israel. I mean, of course. I mean, I really struggled to find a modern day comparison or example in this whole thing where a country, would want, a godly leader, or Christians would want a godly. I really struggled to come up with an example. But no, it was really ancient Israel. They wanted a political leader that would overthrow the Roman Empire. See, in Jesus' time in the first century, the Roman Empire occupied the country, the nation of Israel. I mean, think about American history for a moment, how the British, the Americans had to submit to the rule of the British and they wanted independence. Well, this is exactly how the Israelites feel because, they have the God of the universe on their side. And so why did they crave a political leader per se? It's because in the Israelites' mind, they believed that God had promised them a leader that not only would rule over their nation, but the entire world would be ruled by the effectiveness of this politician and this leader. And so they called this person a Messiah, in the Hebrew meaning Mashiach, which simply means the anointed one. Now, this term in the Bible, in the Old Testament, it's actually not used terribly often. In fact, the word kind of actually came into this evolving over the course of time. And an anointed one means that God is going to select and appoint a leader that's going to have influence that God's going to use. And one of the first, or I would say the most significant places that the Israelites believed they had a clear and true picture was found by a prophet named Daniel, who he was having this vision of God in the throne room, and all of a sudden another man steps into the presence of God in the throne room, and he views this, and the Israelites go, oh my gosh, this is a Messiah, an anointed one who's here to bring peace. And this is what Daniel says. He says, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was the one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven, and he approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations, and peoples of every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. And so the Israelites and the Jewish people, they read this, and they begin to think backwards to some other scriptures. The prophet Isaiah saying, man, for us a child is born, and the government will be on his shoulder. And you'll be called, Emmanuel, God with us. I mean, it's not uncommon in the ancient world, for a title like Emmanuel to be given to a normal, man. But all of a sudden they're beginning, hold on, is that this figure? Many of the Jewish people didn't even believe that this Messiah would be divine, but they maybe thought he was a person, no less. And then there's all these other notions, again, in the prophet Isaiah, the prophet Jeremiah, where it seems to be coming from the root of David, this king. I mean, oh my gosh. I mean, remember those days when King David was king and King Solomon was king? I mean, Israel was a world power. So you're saying someone from that lineage maybe is going to restore David's throne back, and we're going to be the world power. And so they begin to believe this. And then all of a sudden, another minor prophet named Zechariah says this. He says, rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Again, Jerusalem. The daughter Jerusalem, see your king. Oh, he's going to be a king. He comes to you righteous and victorious, lowly and riding on a donkey? On a colt, a foal of a donkey. And I will take away the chariots of Ephraim and the war horses from Jerusalem. Oh my gosh, there's going to be no more war. I mean, Israel had been devastated by other nations, surrounding nations, taking them captive. Oh my gosh, there's going to be no more war. And then the battle bow will be broken. And he will proclaim peace. Oh, we're going to have peace to the nations. His rule is going to extend from sea to sea. I mean, what else does that mean? From sea to sea and the river to the ends of the earth. I mean, what did the Jewish people think the Messiah was going to do? I mean, what else are they talking about? I mean, we know the ending to the story. We know who Jesus is, but they're thinking, man, from sea to sea, the entire world is going to come from our country and our nation. They literally, in Israel, they wanted a Messiah to make Israel great again or to defund the Roman Empire. I mean, gosh, I cannot think of a modern day comparison. And so in Matthew, as Jesus, the week before he dies and he's entering Jerusalem to look at the will of God right in the face, he does something on purpose. He asks his disciples to get him a donkey, because he wanted to communicate the message that he was the Messiah. The word Christ actually means Messiah in the Greek. That Jesus purposely did this. He purposely misled them because it was true, but not in the way that they anticipated or expected. And so it says this in Matthew chapter 21, they brought the donkey and the colt, they placed their cloaks on them for Jesus to sit on, and a very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, while others cut branches from the trees and spread them out on the road. The branches, in the Middle East, these trees were palms. And a palm, the symbol of a palm, was of triumph and victory. What else does this mean? He's going to triumph and he's going to be victorious. They believed he was going to start a revolt against the Roman Empire, that he would be the president, he would be the king. What else could this possibly mean? And it goes on, it says, the crowds that went ahead of him and those that followed shouted, Hosanna, rescue us, save us, deliver us, be the Messiah. And so imagine for a moment, you're in the crowd. Your buddy comes in and rushes in drum. Dude, you know that guy on YouTube who's doing all those miracles? And, it's crazy, right? Dude, he's coming in right now, bro. He's on a donkey. You remember that one passage? He's like, oh my gosh, they get to the crowd and they go, oh my gosh, they're laying down palms. This guy, he's going to start the revolt, right? And then a week later, these guys, they show up to the crowd and Jesus gets arrested. A whole plot twist. And they're looking at, Pontius Pilate, the Roman representative, the governor. And they're like, yo, this is where it's happening. It's about to go down. Look what we say. And Pontius Pilate is accusing Jesus. And Jesus is sitting there and he says nothing. They're like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Say something. You're not supposed to get arrested. You're not supposed to die. And now all of a sudden, when they realize where this is going, that Jesus is willing to lose, not to win, but to lose, not to get reelected, but to lose. And they're looking at us going, what are you doing? And all of a sudden, now some of the same faces that shouted, Hosanna, save us, are the same faces. Some of the same faces that are shouting, crucify him. This guy's a false prophet. He just not doing what I want him to do. How many of us in our lives want Jesus to do something for us? And the moment he does it, in a way, we feel that anger. We feel like you didn't do what you said you were going to do. It didn't look how I wanted it to look. And then all of a sudden, these crowds, it goes up, Jesus enters up, onto the mountain in Golgotha, and he's being crucified, and there's women grieving, and some of his followers, there's sad Galileans, John and Mary are sitting there, the mother of Jesus, and they're weeping, and the blood and water comes out of his side, and he says, it's finished. And they're devastated and distraught because messiahs don't die. I mean, presidents, kings don't die. And I love how Andy Stanley says this. He says, for them, they expected Jesus to do what all dead people do, which is to stay dead, On Easter, there was no 10, 9, 8, 7, cue the sun, 6, 5, 4. Thanks, guys. Is that this wasn't happening, and this is what they expected out of Jesus. And then imagine being his disciples for a moment. The disciples who ask questions like, who's going to sit on your right and your left in your kingdom? Because how did they think about it? In fact, even Peter, he got the answer that, yes, you are the Christ. And Jesus says, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, right? Because this is how they expected it. Can you imagine being a disciple associated with Jesus? Now all of a sudden, you're trying to escape the Roman, rulers who are going to arrest and persecute and kill you. And so you're hiding and you're putting your cloaks on, packing your bags, trying to escape the city and hide a little bit. All of a sudden, questions are saying, man, did I just waste 3 years of my life on something and on someone that was wrong? See, the whole idea of Jesus is that it wasn't just an ideology. There wasn't a group of people saying, oh my gosh, we need to get the story of the Good Samaritan out there. People need to hear that thing on me once they hear it. No, the whole point of Jesus is who he said that he was, right? And so when he's gone, the whole movement is gone. There's no point to stick around. And then it comes to Jesus, who's being crucified on the cross. And he's looking at the people. Can you imagine entering in to Jerusalem knowing that you're making a statement that's completely misleading everybody? For 3 years people have an expectation of you, and there's nothing that you can say or do that's really going to convince them of what you're actually going to do. In fact, he says it, and they still don't believe it. He's like, yeah, the Son of Man needs to rise on 3 days. They're like, oh, so metaphorical, Jesus. But instead, he knows that he has to proclaim the truth at the cost of disappointing even his greatest followers, right? Because this is something, and again, this is, I would say, the bottom line of today, is that Jesus knew that what they wanted wasn't what they needed. What they wanted was a king. What they wanted was a political leader. What they wanted was someone to restore Israel. What they wanted was their freedoms back. And Jesus was going to bring them their freedoms back. But what they got was someone who chose to lose. Someone who chose to establish a spiritual kingdom, a kingdom that wasn't of this world, that would enter into humanity. So can you imagine Jesus, the emotions, being fully human, as it says in Hebrews, man, he was fully human. And he was able, because he was suffered when he was tempted, he's able to help those who are being tempted, right? He's being nailed to a cross, and he hears the cries and the accusations of people, and he says, what? Father, forgive them, for they do not know. That he relinquished his own right to be misunderstood. I mean, he didn't chase down the Pharisees and try to defend himself. He just escaped. He didn't defend himself to Pontius Pilate. He didn't resist, right? And in a world where we want to win, what if we chose to lose? And so for us, if maybe you've been a disappointment in your life to your friends, your children, your spouses, what's the value of disappointment? What do we find it? Where do we find it with Jesus? I believe that we need to suffer disappointment for the sake of connection. Because think about it. Jesus was willing to suffer disconnection to bring about the greatest connection, restoring all mankind unto himself, not just his loyal followers, not just the people with expectations of him, but for all people groups and all nations, that they would have access to God the Father for eternity. And this is the gospel. And so for us, where do we need to disappoint people? Because even though it's what they want, it's not what they need. And our heart is for them, and it offers that opportunity of growth. Now, there's a template in movies and movie industries about what makes a good story. And there's 4 acts to a great story. Now, the first act is where you are introduced to the character, and you learn the rules of the universe. And this character is somehow called into an adventure. And in this first act, this first scene, there's a problem that's being presented. And, the character then moves to act 2, where they try to solve the problem. They try to solve the problem on their own strength in every which way that is comfortable to them, because they're avoiding actually doing the hard thing that they need to do to solve the problem. And so in act 2 is when they disappoint all of their friends and close people, and they hurt and they damage relationships because they're unwilling to do the hard thing. And then act 3 is when the character has to enter into their own vulnerability. And it's in that place of choosing to die to being right and to do the hard thing they finally needed to do, that they end up moving into Act 4 and redeem all of the relationships. And the reason why I love this so much is because this is the gospel. The gospel, the greatest story ever told. Man was created, the rules of the universe. And the man was invited into adventure and relationship with God to represent him. And all of a sudden, a problem's introduced. Sin enters up. Man is terrible, and they disconnect themselves from God. They disconnect themselves from others. And so Act 2, man tries to build towers to the heavens so they can become like God. And maybe they can solve their own needs and their own aches and their own longings in their heart. And then, what do? They look for kings. They say, God, give us a king. He gives them Saul and a whole bunch of kings who also fail them because, again, they're just one of their own, right? They look for a politician in the first century world to save them and rescue them and be their hope. And in the process, this story, the story of the gospel, is far different than other stories because while in most stories, it's the characters that have to do the work, in this story, God enters, and this story is about God and who he is, that he is the one that dies, the death, that the character needed to die, and in the process redeems all relationships back unto himself. This is the beauty of the gospel. It's not about what we have done. It's about what Jesus has done. And so when we enter and submit our life to the lordship of Jesus, now we get to receive the perfection that God offers us. It's no longer about how perfect I am. It's that Jesus was perfect. And this is the great story. But I think for us to enter into this story, it requires our vulnerability. And it requires our death. And sometimes this means disappointing people. Disappointing people that we're going to be a Jesus follower. And this means that we're not going to be fake, right? I think one of my greatest fears about even giving this talk today is sometimes it's just so easy to say, oh yeah, like if you disappoint someone, that must mean you're in the will of God. But think about this. Sometimes isn't this an excuse of like, who cares about the haters? Like, oh yeah, disappoint them. I'm supposed to disappoint people. But I don't think this is what this means. See, disappointment means engaging with a death of our own. It means suffering disconnection because we know that becomes an opportunity for connection. See, disappointment, it's Act 2. It's Act 2. And disappointment is required in a broken universe. It's required to enter into connection and ultimately redemption. So when we experience being a disappointment or disappointing others, when we experience it, it needs to be a sign that we need to be taught. Disappointment is our teacher. We need to pass through it in order to find connection and redemption. Because people don't always want someone who's right. They want somebody who's real. They want someone who's honest. They want someone who's vulnerable. They don't want someone who's perfect. And you'd be surprised that it might be the very act of disappointing someone that allows them to release you from the expectations they had of you. And isn't this the major pain that we all face? Isn't all pain that we experience from failed expectations? How many of us have experienced disappointment from God that just like Jesus entering into Jerusalem, we have been greatly and massively let down? And if we're disappointed, and if it's our teacher, we need to die. Like, I would say a couple months ago, my wife and I, we've been really growing and healing. It's been the most beautiful process, but it's required so many hard conversations and death. And one day, we were sitting at our white kitchen table, and we're sitting there, and my wife is kind of bringing up, an issue in a relationship. And again, I'm in Act 2 because I'm trying to solve the problem in all of my comfort. I'm trying to say, man, look what all I've done. What do? I recall all of my good that should outweigh the bad. And as we're sitting there, I had this moment of understanding, oh my gosh, what if I just chose right now in this moment to listen? See, when we experience disappointment and the shame of disappointing, I believe it's that moment of curiosity that we need to lean into. And when we lean into it, it might actually bring about some of the greatest transformation. And so I said, what if I just chose to really listen to what she was saying? And I led her to the floor. I said, hey, right now I'm literally going to listen. It sounds like you're trying to communicate something much bigger about our relationship than I could understand. And she proceeds to tell me, I feel like that in so many ways you have not been as intentional in our marriage, and I have felt unloved, and I am mourning the loss and grieving, feeling like, man, that I had someone who was intentional and loved me and really saw me. And it was in that moment for the first time that I saw myself, and I admitted the ugly truth that was I wasn't being a good husband. Many times when we disappoint people, it's because there's a truth there that we don't want to admit. And the truth was, I hadn't. And in all my ways of trying to solve the problem with comfort and what I was so accustomed to in defense, I needed to die. And it wasn't just one conversation. It was like a couple months where I would sit and I would all of a sudden feel that shame and disappointment, and I'd be processing in those random places in the shower and on the bed. And one moment, like we had this huge, again, like kind of fight talking about this whole issue again. And it was like in the middle of the kitchen, I'm sitting on the floor, and it's crazy how once you enter into the death, that you can say something in a fourth or a fifth year, for us, 5 years of a marriage, that is so simple but means something. Now, before I say what it was, I remember seeing this video online. Don't you hate it when a dumb like Facebook video pops up and it like changes your life and you're like, why did that get me? Like I went to church, but that? And I was like watching this video and it was said, name the best piece of advice that someone's ever given you. And this guy proceeded to say, I was in couples counseling and my therapist said, how fast do you think you could tear your spouse down? And the guy was like, I probably could find 5 words, to be honest. Like, I mean, I don't even need a minute. I just need a sentence, and I could find it. And I looks at the wife, and how about you? He's like, I probably in 3 words, if I'm real honest, like, your dad is like you, like, right? Like, and the therapist looks at him and says, so if you believe and you know exactly what to say to tear them down, don't you also know the exact thing that would build them up and give them security? See, the truth is not far off. We're just unwilling to face disappointment. We're unwilling to believe the ugly truth about who we are. So where do you need to be disappointing? Where do you need to admit it? Where do you need to feel it? And for me, my freedom came on the kitchen floor saying, I need you. See, what's so fascinating about words is that you can say them and they don't carry any meaning, and then sometimes you can say less words and it carries the meaning of the universe. But I think it requires us to dive deep into the disappointment. Maybe we have Jesus who's disappointing us. He's not meeting our expectations. Or maybe you know you're giving someone what they need and not what they want from you. For me, even too, as a leader, what I'm experiencing so much of is like, there's a time when I really wanted to be the powerful, cool, exciting person who would lead people and give them hope. And the reason why I wanted that is because I saw other people who were doing that. And I didn't feel like I was that person. And as a leader, I began to try to become that person, but it wasn't who I was, because I realized for all that I could be intense and I could be emotional and I could say the cliches, for me, what I realized is that my life has come in death, is that you need to die in order to resurrect. And sometimes it doesn't come in covering up our pain and disappointment and shouting cliches and believing that God's all for us. Sometimes it actually comes in the form of admitting the ugly truth and being disappointed or disappointing our view of ourselves and being willing to die so that we can resurrect and actually become the free and the truer, the better version, the version that Jesus died for. That we take our cues from a resurrected King where he was willing to lose his entire following. He was willing to be misrepresented, misjudged, condemned, and crucified so that he could bring about a better kingdom. And so for you, who are you trying to be? It's what people want, but not what they need. And maybe you need to die. Father, we know that deep down we are in some way a disappointment. And we can't face the ugly truth. And so Jesus, as you are fully human and you're able to help us because you suffered temptation, God, help us and connect with us in our own humanity and brokenness to be where we are and not where we'd like to be or not where people need us to be. But instead, allow us to be authentic to who we really are and who you're making us. Allow us to enter into that vulnerability. Allow us to suffer disconnection for the greater value of connecting. And Lord, help us to use our own vulnerability to start the conversation into becoming redemption. We thank you in your name. Amen.
Faithful through the ages, God of Abraham, you're the God of covenant and faithful promises. And time again, you have proven you'll do just what you said. Though the storms may come and the winds will blow, I'll remain steadfast. And let my heart learn when you speak a word, it would come to pass. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting sun, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. Though the seasons change, you remain the same. God from age to age, though the earth may pass away, your word remains the same. Yeah, though history can prove there's nothing you can't do, you're faithful and true. Though the storms may come and the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast. And let my heart learn when you speak a word, it would come to pass. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting sun, I will praise your name.
you know, it's so interesting because like what's so confusing about trying to follow Jesus is like, man, I know that he's faithful. I know this to be true or said to be true in my head, but in my heart, I can't feel that sense that he's always faithful because we felt that disappointment. But I really believe the beauty of God is that he is who he is. You know, talking about being our authentic and real selves. You know, I remember when I was in middle school, for instance, like I never smiled or cracked jokes because I was with a group of friends who, you know, they were too cool to like laugh and, you know, engage with each other in that way. But I realized like I met some best friends and it made me like smile. And I realized, isn't this the funny thing about personality and character? Is that no matter what you try to do, who you are will always leak out of you. And the same is true of God, is that because he is faithful, it's going to be inevitable that he will be faithful, that he is going to be faithful and true, that he's going to continue to do work, whether we know it or not. It's just who he is, that he can't help himself. Is that this is the God that I want to invite you to be in a relationship with. And so I don't know where you are today. I believe we have our prayer team, whether it's out in the lobby or down front here, but I want to encourage you that if you are feeling that disappointment, let it be your teacher to become your death. And once you have a death, just like Jesus, you'll resurrect. Thanks so much for coming, everybody. Next week, we will be back with week 3 of Personified. We'll see you there. Take care.